Have you tried Anchor FM yet? What are you waiting for? Anchor is the only platform that includes all the tools that you need to launch your podcast instantly, including monetization. That's right. Start making money right now. Record, edit, distribute, and earn, all right from your Anchor FM dashboard. It's time to set sail on that podcast that you've been dreaming of making. Just don't forget your Anchor. Anchor FM, the easiest way to make a podcast ever.
There's a speed limit in this state, Mr. Neff. 45 miles an hour.
How fast was I going, officer?
I'd say around 90.
But what about us?
Memories. You're talking about memories.
Good, now have a drink.
I don't want anything of his or any part of it.
Except his life.
I wonder if I know what you mean.
I wonder if you wonder.
Played it for her, you play it for me. I lived a few weeks while she loved me. Waiting for a lady. Someday you'll understand that.
Got some news that's gonna take a lot of tension off you and Laura.
Stop it, Dix! I can't take any more of this!
I should be in it for you.
You know the story?
What story?
Maybe because he was drunk.
Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
Well, I'll give her the message.
But they're asleep all over America.
Welcome to the Speakeasy Noir Cast, a podcast discussing film noirs of yesterday and neo noirs of today. Each week, we will deliver a discussion and analysis of classic and neo noir films, all mixed in with our unintelligible banter. Your hosts for the show, Carly Street and Jason D. Morris.
Chrome accepts me.
It does.
There's like no security settings on this whatsoever. So if my computer just sort of blinks out in the middle of this podcast, we'll know why.
Joe's being hacked by the aliens.
You never know. Hey, well, you're making shows now about the aliens, apparently, so you're on their radar.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
So you started it, basically.
Yeah. No, well, I'm sorry if they probe you.
You're not sorry at all.
I did interview Whitley Strieber a few years ago, so I'm probably on their radar too.
Who's Whitley Strieber?
Oh, he's like the poster boy for alien probing.
Oh, really? Okay.
He wrote the book Communion, which was made into the Christopher Walken movie about the guy who got abducted by aliens and probed famously.
Yeah.
So he started that whole thing.
Oh, interesting.
Back in the 80s, I think it was like 85 when he said he was abducted, and then the book came out in 87 or something like that.
Wow. Yeah, I'm just looking it up. Yep, Communion 87. Interesting.
He's a fascinating guy. But yeah, that's a whole. Oh yeah, he was a horror writer before this happened. Allegedly. So, yeah, he's a really super smart guy. But he's kind of out there, as you might imagine.
Or maybe it happened.
Then he but he's written a whole bunch of books since then, and he sort of expanded the story that he went under hypnosis and recovered memories of having been in like an alien secret school when he was growing up in Texas. And I mean, it just grew and grew and grew and grew and his writing is really intelligent and interesting. But we should talk about the UFO, the hidden UFO messages in Lost Highway, because there's a UFO abduction theory that could tie that whole movie up.
I know nothing about this, so you're going to have to definitely.
Oh, I don't know. I just think the lighting.
Made it up.
The lighting. Well, yeah. I mean, the lighting when Fred is abducted from the jail cell, and yeah, it just looks like a UFO abduction to me, like how you would shoot that. So
yeah, but it's actually funny that you bring that up, because Reznor, produced the soundtrack of it, and when he did the song for Natural Born Killers, Burn. In that video, it does that same sort of lighting style where it does look like there's a UFO over him with that single like sort of spotlight kind of thing. It's very similar in terms of style.
And that would have been before Lynch made Lost Highway, like a year or two.
Like 4 years. That was 93, 94.
I think it's 94 when the album came out, but then, 93 was when Natural Born Killers came out. You're right.
Yeah.
Don't tell
he
it
shot
now.
it while they were shooting.
Byrne wasn't on Downward Spiral, was it? It was only on the soundtrack.
Yeah, it was only on National Killers. Yeah. For you at home, the gentleman that we're speaking to today is Joseph Madri, who is a veteran book writer. And he is also a documentary filmmaker. He's wrote, I don't know, Joe, what, like 10, 15 books now? Maybe more?
10. I think 10.
Okay. Wow. 11 now, because we got The Dark Side of Acting Up coming out that you're in.
Right.
I don't know if you count those, but, you know.
Sure. Why not? I count them all.
It's like I wrote a paper when I was 3 years old, and that counts as a book.
Exactly. You should see my resume.
And he did this amazing documentary called Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, the evolution of the American horror film. Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite horror film documentaries that's out there. And I would suggest all of you guys check it out. But before we get into the movie that we're going to talk about today.
You left out the fact that he's the nicest person to email on the planet as well.
Oh, yes. Well, Joe's just a pleasant guy.
Not to encourage every random weirdo to send him emails. I apologize if that happens. But if you do,
I don't think he wants that.
Reply really nicely. So.
And Carly's like, and his email address is Joseph.
Yeah.
Here he is.
At donotemaiLme.com.
All right.
But yeah, he's a wonderful, wonderful human being. Don't want to embarrass him too much. People will see him blush through the audio.
Good.
Before we get into tonight's movie, we're going to do our drink for the night. And Joe, I don't know if you know about this, but we do a sort of specialty drink every episode, hopefully relating it to the film that we're going to be watching. Sometimes we can't do that, but for tonight, I found an awesome drink called the Rusty Nail.
Oh.
And obviously, I'm going to relate this to the Nine Inch Nails connection to the film that we're doing tonight. And the Rusty Nail is 1.5 ounces of Scotch whiskey.
Nice.
3/4 ounce of Carly, here we go.
Oh God.
3/4 ounces of Drambuie.
Of what?
Is that something anybody's heard of?
Of what?
Drambuie, yeah.
Drambuie? Okay, I've never heard of this. I don't know what this is. I will have to look this up. So 3.25 ounces of Drambuie and a lemon twist. And what you do is you add ice to an old-fashioned glass, chill the glass, pour the Scotch in the Drambuie, stir and garnish with a lemon twist and serve. So pretty simple, easy drink. I do have to find out what Drambuie is. What exactly is this, Joe? Do you know what it is? Have you had it?
I haven't had that particular. I mean, I'm a big fan of old fashioned, so yeah, I would drink that in a heart. You know, it's actually 10 a.m. in my world right now. I would probably still drink it, but
especially the way the world's going these days.
Yeah, it's 11 p.m. somewhere, my friend. So you crack it open.
Right. Yeah. I think there's it's strange. This is random, but I think there's a documentary filmmaker who did a George Romero documentary whose name is Rusty Nail.
Oh, no kidding. Oh, you know what? Yeah, I think you're right. I recall that.
Completely random. So he has a drink named after him, apparently.
Apparently, yeah. And these are all supposedly Prohibition drinks or recipes from Prohibition era.
Yeah. So it's been a while. So maybe he was named after the drink then. His parents were alcoholics.
Maybe. All right, guys at home. Well, hopefully you guys can enjoy a Rusty Nail along with us as we play the trailer for our film tonight, which is the 1997 film Lost Highway.
We've met before, haven't we?
I don't think so.
At your house, don't you remember?
No, I don't.
As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
That's crazy, man.
Call me.
I like that.
I think there's no such thing as a bad coincidence.
like to remember things my own way, not necessarily the way they happened.
Someone broke in and taped us while we slept.
Is that you? Are both of them you?
We have to get out of here.
Why didn't you tell me anything?
It's been a pleasure talking to you.
If I ever found out somebody was making out with her.
He'll kill us.
I told you I was here.
How'd you do that?
Ask me.
And went to this Italian restaurant in Studio City one night, and I remember the waitress came over and she started talking about, because that was his wife. They went to dinner at this restaurant in Studio City, and then they went out to their car together. He went back into the restaurant, left her out there. He went inside to get his gun, which he left behind in the restaurant.
Oh my God.
And she got killed while he was inside getting his gun. And then his gun didn't match up to the bullet that killed her. But I just remember we went to this restaurant for a night out, and the waitress who turned out to be the person who had waited on him that night. She started telling us this horrific story in the middle of date night. I didn't know anything about it. So we didn't even ask. She just said, you realize you're sitting in the booth. And I'm like, what?
Oh, you were in the exact booth? Holy shit.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And then I think it was sometime later when I put together, like, oh my God, that was the pasty faced nightmare man from Lost Highway.
Oh my God.
Welcome to LA.
Right?
Finish them up. Bloody hell.
I mean, I know him from Beretta. I used to watch it all the time when I was a kid.
Yeah. I think I never watched Beretta as a kid, but I knew him from In Cold Blood.
Okay. Yeah. Also good.
Yeah.
So when I heard that story, I was like, holy crap, really?
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine though.
Yeah, he still does signings sometimes around. I don't think he's acted since Lost Highway, but he'll still do signings sometimes in the LA, like in Burbank at the Hollywood show, I think, which is basically an autograph show. Every now and then he'll turn up, which is sort of newsworthy. I mean, it draws a lot of attention when he shows up because he's known for something other than being an actor.
Right. Yeah. No. Yeah. I think Lost Highway was the last movie that he was in. Him and Richard Pryor. I think this was his last one as well. Which I always surprised every time I watch this movie. I haven't watched it in a while. But after watching it again for this podcast, I forgot he's in it. And when he shows up, I don't know. I love Richard Pryor. It's a joy to see, but it's so him still, and it's just funny.
Jack Nance is in that scene with him too, and I don't know how much. I don't know how long. I don't know how much acting Jack Nance did after Lost Highway. I know he sort of turned up in everything that David Lynch did while he was around. I don't remember exactly when he died. I had forgotten that he was in it.
But there's a huge cast of characters in this film. I mean, we've got obviously our stars: Bill Pullman, Patricia Arquette, Balthazar Getty, Robert Blake, Richard Pryor, Michael. How do you pronounce his last name? Massey or Massey? I'm not sure.
I don't know.
Fun boy from The Crow. I mean, you've got cameos by Marilyn Manson. Henry Rollins. I mean, there's all kinds of people in this movie. It's crazy. And it's just, it's one of those off the wall, crazy movies that I'm just intrigued by. I still, to this day, I don't get it. I watched it again last night. Shawnee comes in halfway through the movie after he's done his prison scene transformation. Mm-hmm. And she's trying to figure it out and ask me questions like it's a normal movie.
Right.
And she'll ask me something. I'm like, No, that's really hard to explain. I mean, it would probably take me like 20 minutes to explain that. I just go ahead and enjoy this portion of it.
Yeah, you're not going to try to synopsize it to set up this discussion.
We are, yeah, and I actually every episode that we've done, I have skipped over Carly's synopsis and just totally forgot about it. I'm still trying to get into this too.
Completely understandable. It's never that great.
No, I want to hear it. I want to hear Carly's synopsis. Let's go.
Okay, so we got this new thing here where Carly gets dramatic.
No pressure
for her synopsis. So here it is, folks. Carly's in a nutshell.
I'm already laughing.
Synopsis. And now it's time for Carly's super famous in a nutshell synopsis.
I tried really hard with this as well. Okay, so the life of a tortured saxophonist accused of his wife's murder inexplicably merges with that of a young mechanic set on an equally sinister path as their stories intersect in the most abstract fashion ever committed to mainstream cinema.
It's not inaccurate.
I'll buy it.
It works.
It was a little long.
I feel like we're left.
Worst honeymoon ever, kind of standard.
Oh yeah, her last one, like her synopsis was worst honeymoon ever. That was like her entire synopsis.
Accurate.
It's perfect. And if you want to know, that was The Touch of Evil.
Right.
Not inaccurate. That's good. I think you left off the sort of end of the movie where it all comes around, you know,
well,
and starts to make sense and also not make any sense.
Well, I don't want to do spoiler alert without spoiler alert, do I? Bloody hell.
I mean, David Lynch doesn't really talk about this film, and when he does, he can't really explain it. He just kind of says, "Yeah, I don't really remember how all of that came about." And he won't try to explain. He won't, of course he would never synopsize it, and he's not going to try to break down the plot, and he doesn't really answer questions in a straightforward way about anything. Mm-hmm. But the things that I think he's said about the origin, I think there's like 3 different things he's talked about as kind of the origin of the project, and one of them was that he read a book called Night People, a novel by Barry Gifford, who ended up co-writing the screenplay with him. Yes. I actually, because we were doing this, I ordered that novel, which I haven't read, so I can't tell you anything about that. But I think Lynch said basically there was like one line of dialogue in that novel that he really liked, and he just took it wasn't like he was going to adapt the novel. He just liked this one line, and it kind of got his imagination going. And then he and Barry Gifford got together and just sort of riffed. They just started saying, what about this? And initially they hated each other's ideas, and they just kept talking until they were having a dialogue, as abstract as that dialogue might have been. So that was the starting point. And then I think he's also said, David Lynch has said that somebody came to his house, buzzed the front door of his house and said, Dick Laurent is dead, or that's what he heard. Wow. So that actually happened to him. And David Lynch lives in the Hollywood Hills in a house that just like the house in the film, it has these really small windows on the front. So you can't go to the window and look out and see who's standing in front of your house. So by the time you get out there, there's nobody there. And he didn't really know what, if he'd heard it right or if anybody was there, he couldn't explain it. And actually they ended up shooting the house that's in the film is like down, I think it's right down the street from David Lynch's actual house. And he bought that house for the movie so that they could change the front of the house so that there were no windows. He didn't want to use his own house in the movie, but he wanted that same effect of because the house in the film, it's the same thing. It's got those really thin, tall windows.
Yeah, I heard that, and they said that he also shot inside the house, and they built walls in there and whatnot. And I think that kind of lends itself to what, when I was watching it this last time, it looks like a set, and I'm assuming that's why, because they actually built walls for the movie and stuff inside. Because to me, it looks very sparse and like a set, like a cheaply made set. But I guess it actually, from what I read, is actually they shot inside the house.
Well, he also, I think, it's the use of like the blacks in Lost Highway are super black. I mean, if somebody goes down a hallway, they completely disappear, which is something that usually like filmmakers can't get away with. Like it won't pass quality control if you dip the blacks that low. But that was exactly what he wanted, and so I think it gives you this kind of like instinctive feeling that there's something false about it, or unreal about it. And you can interpret that, I suppose, in two ways, by saying, well, it must be a set because they're shooting this in such a way that we can't see very far. So they must be trying to kind of trick the audience into believing there's something there when there's really nothing there. But it also has that kind of uncanny quality where you're really like, you watch that movie and you're really kind of straining to see into the darkness, but it's total darkness. And that has an effect on you as a viewer. It's really creepy.
Absolutely. And, we recently just covered the movie Brick by Ryan Johnson. And there's a particular scene in here that is very similar to that sort of aspect of Lost Highway, where we see Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character walk downstairs in the Penn's house, which is going down to the basement. And it's so dark that they cross-faded the Penn walking up the stairs at the same time. And it's such an eerie, like sort of ghostly, otherworldly effect. It reminded me a lot, because I just watched both of them, or I just watched Brick, that when I watched Lost Highways, it had a lot of similarity or quality of a feel to this movie as well, because the blacks in this movie, and I think that was probably from him wanting to initially want to shoot it in black and white. But having done it in color, I think he did a phenomenal job of getting all those sorts of shades of darkness in there. Even with the wardrobe and everything else about it, it all meshes very well together, and it's very eerie. Even when they're out in the middle of nowhere, like in the desert, with those sort of alien spotlightish, kind of look that you're talking about, or the headlights of the car, or whatever it might be. They did a fantastic job with that sort of style, whatever that style might be. I guess people would consider it noir, but it's very different, Yeah.
Well, I think he's very selective when he uses red in the film. It's not like a color palette that he's trying to get throughout the film, but when he uses it, it's really striking, and probably because you're seeing a lot of things in those sort of shades of gray, black and white tones. And so it really stands out. The scene toward the end where it's Fred again. So it's Bill Pullman opening the door, and he sees this sort of like blown out, demonic looking Patricia Arquette, in there. And she's like taunting him and saying, "Do you want to know why?" And just the quality of that. I mean, the use of just like black and red as the two dominant colors. It's so surreal and so creepy, and you really feel like, all right, he just opened a door into hell. and that could be so gimmicky, and I feel like most filmmakers can't pull that off. It would have been over the top, or it would have been too abstract, or it would have been almost funny. But he does such an amazing job of controlling the tone of the film that really, when that happens, at least the effect that it has on me as a viewer is like being in a nightmare. As it's not over the top. It's not something that it is a gut punch for me anyway.
I agree with that. I think he's so successful at it because if you start out watching this film, it might be a little off kilter, a little strange, just in the quietness of it all.
Yeah.
But it still plays pretty straight for a while. But those little nuances that he creates, whether it's the crazy, saxophone solo, or just the quietness of Bill Pullman's character, or their odd, strange sex scene, or whatever it might be. I feel like he's almost foreshadowing that stranger stuff, like him opening the door to Patricia Arquette's character and seeing that. And that's what makes it work so well, is why other filmmakers can't really pull it off, because they're thinking about foreshadowing story, but not necessarily style, which is also important, particularly with if you're going to do something as strange and weird as that. And I think Sam Raimi is another director that can kind of pull off strangeness, because he's able to foreshadow that as where other filmmakers can't, because he does crazy, wacky stuff, but it somehow works within his movies as well. But David Lynch is definitely a master at doing that. I think he does that in most of his films, whether it's Twin Peaks or, Blue Velvet, whatever it is.
You're right about the pacing. I mean, I can't think of anybody else who can do that slow, deliberate pace and have that kind of control over the minutia of the story, which is really like, I mean, so Shawnee didn't watch the beginning of the movie, right?
She came in about right when Balthazar Getty's character comes into play.
Yeah, to me that's Act 2. Right. Yeah. I mean, that you're in Act 2. Like, to me, there's a hard, there's a hard turn there, because you go into a completely different story, and tonally it's a little bit different, at least initially. And then you kind of come back around to that ominous tone, more and more and more as sort of the second act into the third act goes. But that first act, everything about it is just so deliberate and builds so much mystery. And a lot of it is, it's not giving you, really any story to grasp onto. So you're constantly reaching for the story. And because it's got that noir style, you're going, okay, the wife is not saying much. She's really hot. Is she cheating on him and he's aware of it? Does he not know yet? Is it, you're trying to figure it out. So he's making you do all this work, but then he's also creating a sense of dread in these like subliminal way. I mean, so the first time that I watched it with my wife, she didn't watch. She watched the first act, and it sort of got to the point where Fred goes down that darkened hall, and there's nothing going on, and you're waiting, like you have this sense that something horrible is going to happen. And at the time watching it, then I had this really good sound system that I don't have anymore. I miss it. But, it had this huge like subwoofer on the floor, and we had the sound cranked all the way up, which is how you're supposed to, watch a David Lynch movie, because he's such a sound guy. And there was nothing going on except on like that bass, bass track. And you could hear, when we were watching it in that scene, you could hear the subwoofer like pulsing out air. But it wasn't sound, or it was like sub-audible sound. And so I did some research at some point, was like, yeah, he did that intentionally, that there's actually something sub-audible going on there. So if you have a good sound system, it has this effect where you can't hear anything, but the hair stands up on your arm and you don't know why. I mean, that's the level on which he's working, to just use every kind of trick, in his bag to get under your skin, and that it is, it's not just storytelling. I mean, what he withholds in terms of story is where a lot of the power is, and forcing you to make connections and forcing you to kind of grasp for a story. You have to be a participant, and people who can't participate or don't want to participate, they hate David Lynch movies. It's just frustrating.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And that is that is definitely part of his genius, because there's very few movies where you could get away with not telling the audience basically anything. Like, and exactly what you're talking about, where the audience has to work. That's exactly what I did last night when I was watching this. I'm trying to figure out these two people's relationship and what's going on between them, because to me, it's obvious there's some kind of frustration there, whatever it might be. He makes a point of having this these quiet moments between these people, and then you have this sort of awkward sex scene between them, and then you have him sort of going out. I guess it happened before the sex scene, but him going out and doing his music act, which is kind of creepy on its own in some way. But there's so much weight to all of these scenes without there really being any story there, that you do have to try to piece things together that aren't there. It's very weird, but it does work ultimately. And I think, speaking of the style and the lighting and all of that, and how that stuff is related to like noir films, it plants that little seed into your head about, okay, this is not just a dark film, but this is a dark story. There's something bad going on. We just don't know yet, even though nothing really happens between these people besides the videotape, which is just, doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. Well, it's true. There's not any overt violence until Mr. Eddie, which is you're into the second act by the time he shows up,
right.
And like beats the tailgater. But yeah, but you're sort of waiting for it up until that point. You're sort of waiting for something horrible to happen until he comes into the movie. Like, oh, okay, this guy feels like he belongs in this movie.
Right. Yeah. Even like the death scene of what's his name? Fred. What's Bill Pullman? Fred. Right. Even when he supposedly has killed his wife or whatnot, like there's nothing that has led to that. There's nothing that explains it. It just sort of is, and he goes to jail.
Right.
There wasn't even any violence in that. And we already had a murder. And so, yeah, I think people are anticipating something coming on, because it really, even with the murder, it hasn't really happened yet. And I personally thought it was going to start happening in the jail. You got Henry Rollins there. He's going to jail, all these things. It's like, I thought, especially the first time I saw it, this was going to end up being like the second half of the movie was going to be like this prison movie.
Right.
But then of course we get this otherworldly transformation. And I remember the first time I saw this in the theater, there was nothing else I could say by what the fuck just happened. Like I had no idea.
So, hey, Carly, let's take a break real quick and talk to our listeners about our sponsors.
You're listening to the Speakeasy Noircast, the show that brings you binge drinking with a side of noir, with your hosts, Carly Street and Jason D. Morris.
Is it an anthology film? And now we're on to the second story.
It's amazing that you brought that up, because it's exactly the way I view this movie. I view it as an anthology film, because they're two, even though it has this sort of connected wraparound third act, those two stories are very, very different, but we have this Robert Blake characters sort of keeping the cohesiveness, or at least like a connection between it, even though story-wise within these two individuals, there's no real connection other than Patricia Arquette playing dual doppelganger roles, or I don't know. So I look at them as completely different stories until that wraparound comes around, which to me is its own little story. Once Bill Pullman's character comes back, it's like, it feels like that's sort of its own thing on its own, because and to me it's almost like a prequel as well to the first half of the story. Even though it's sort of like it's a prequel sort of because he goes to his own house and tells him the guy is dead, which we see in the beginning, but at the same time it's like doesn't make sense because the same cops are there and they chase him down. And it's so off the wall. Just so off the wall.
What's crazy about this thing, that watching the movie now, the Robert Blake, so his character is really the thing that ties the two stories together. His presence as this mystery man,
right.
It's sort of what ties those things together. This is a guy who in real life, went on trial for murdering his wife. That's what the story is about. Did Fred murder his wife? And David Lynch has said that when he was writing the script, he was really heavily influenced by the O.J. Simpson trial. So he was another real life guy who went on trial for murdering his wife. My theory is that David Lynch, and Barry Gifford, I don't know how much, what exactly the details of their collaboration were, but that they sort of had that first act and they followed it to this kind of natural conclusion where the guy's, put away in jail and maybe didn't quite know, where the story went from there. And then, they're working on the script and the O.J. Simpson trial is going on. And David Lynch has said that the thing that really struck him about the O.J. Simpson trial was, he believed, like I think most people, that O.J. did it. And yet he's able to sit in trial and just completely deny it. And so, David Lynch is looking at it going, how do you cope with something like that? Or one way of coping is to just shut down, compartmentalize that you've done this horrible thing. And you essentially become a sociopath. You turn it off. It didn't happen. Total denial. Wasn't me. We see a lot of this in politics right now. Just total denial. Not me. I'm not that kind of person. I never could have done that. And that was sort of the hook, I think, that he hung his hat on writing Lost Highway was this, in this abstract way, saying this guy, after killing his wife, becomes a completely different person, leading a completely different life, just blocks out the first act of the story entirely. And it's not a clean, this is not a linear narrative. So that doesn't logically explain it, but that sort of, in an abstract way explains it. And then, as the story progresses through Act 2 and Act 3, the sort of the blood kind of seeps through the carpet. He can't hold it down. There are all these clues, and the mystery man, the Robert Blake character, is what really brings it, kind of to the surface, where he becomes eventually, becomes Fred again.
Yeah. And, it's funny that you bring up the OJ thing, because it's almost prophetic that Robert Blake goes on trial for murdering his wife, because a lot of people still think that he did it, even though he's been, acquitted or whatever. I would have, looking back on it now, I would have thought maybe that had happened before this movie, but it didn't happen in 2001. But it's just sort of like a weird sort of connection with him having this fascination with the O.J. Simpson trial, and that sort of being able to disconnect with that. And then us as an audience, or just people in general, like hearing about him potentially killing his wife. And, a lot of people just thought he was very cold about it and disconnected.
Right.
And it's art imitating life imitating art kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, you can't watch the movie now without having that in the back of your mind. Yeah. Because the movie then becomes, it becomes almost, it's like, sort of metafictional in a way. Right. And I think if Lost Highway were a straightforward narrative, about a guy who kills his wife, and then somebody from the film, goes out into the world and is accused of something like that, that would be one thing. You'd be like, oh, that's kind of weird, but that there's that connection. But I think because Lost Highway is so abstract, it's even creepier, because what is this character that Robert Blake is playing? Right. what is, I think I also remember David Lynch at one point saying that, he cast Robert Blake, but let Robert Blake control his look. So Robert Blake is the one who shows up in this sort of like black monk's robe, with a shaved head and pancake batter on his face or whatever it is, and so, what was he, is he's like somewhere between the death in the Seventh Seal and Uncle Fester from the Addams Family. What is he, and what is he supposed to represent? And there's no, it's another one of these things that the movie's creepy because there's no easy answer to that. Mm-hmm. You can't go, oh, he's death, or he's the dark side of Fred, or whatever. There's not a coherent. You feel like there's not a coherent worldview behind this of what's real and what's not real and what's logical and what's not logical. So it keeps you off balance all the time. And it's the being off balance that really, I mean, I felt just watching this again recently, it was the same way as I felt watching Eraserhead for the first time or watching the new season of Twin Peaks, where you're just going, I can't figure this out. but the technique and the subtle effect that it's having on me on like a biological level is really powerful. And when people try to emulate that, it just seems like being weird for weird's sake. And I think sometimes actually David Lynch slips into just weird for weird's sake. And I don't love everything he's done, but boy, when he's on his game, and I think he was really on his game with Lost Highway, it just, I just sit there and marvel that anybody can, reach through the screen and grab you like that without a coherent linear narrative. I'm a story guy, so that blows my mind.
I agree with that. I think that when he is on his game, it's amazing. Going back to Robert Blake, Carly, what do you think his character represents? Because I have my own ideas, but
I feel a bit daft because I'm not really the biggest fan of David Lynch, to be honest with you.
I didn't think you would be.
Listening to you guys talk really in depth about it, and I just feel a bit silly. But I really like.
Is this going to be like the episode where Jason said he didn't like Bogart, and now it's flipped? Like you say, I don't like David Lynch, and he's going to just.
I feel like there's some kind of curse that is like traveling from San Francisco right now over the Atlantic towards me, because I genuinely, I feel
bad juju your way.
Don't send me juju. I feel bad saying it, but I've never really been that big of a David Lynch fan. But I actually, surprisingly, quite like Lost Highway. I can't figure it out for the life of me.
Liked it?
I've got no freaking idea what the hell is going on. But I enjoy that I can't figure it out. If that seems...
Well, I'm pretty sure it's the sort of like disconnected leading man thing. That seems like your thing. Like Bill Pullman is at top of his game, I think, in this movie.
Pullman, I'm not going to lie. You had seen Bill Pullman. But I've watched this over the course of 10 years because I'm a big Bill Pullman fan. And I still, 10 years later, cannot figure out anything about it. There's literally one line hooked in this movie. And I'm probably quoting it wrong, but it's something along the lines of where he says, I like to remember things my own way, not the way that they happen.
Yeah.
And that is the whole essence of the film being crazy to me. And that's what keeps me coming back to it. That's why I like it. That's why I can get on board with this one, even though it is mad and it's crazy and it's out there. And I don't know what's going on. But I want to. Every time I watch it, I want to figure it out.
Well, I mean, that particular like line that you're quoting there is really my entire theory on this movie. Like, I try not to have a theory on the movie, but I can't help it. Like, you watch it and you try to put it together. Yeah. And for me, that particular line is extremely important to this entire film, because I feel like once he goes to jail, that it's his psyche that snaps. It doesn't actually physically turn into somebody else. I think everything else from that point on is just in his head. And when we get to like the third act, we're just basically seeing the beginning of the film before anything else kind of happened. And that's kind of the way that I took it, or at least I like to think of it, because of that particular line. It's like he likes to remember things the way that he wants to remember them, not necessarily how they were.
Yeah, but then I feel like is he manipulating the entire story? Because he's remembering how he wants to. So is that even accurate?
Well, I think that's why David Lynch doesn't. He wants people to, bring kind of whatever personal interpretations or whatever. He wants them to engage with it, and I think that's why he doesn't talk about most of his movies. And I remember some interview where he talked about how he loves mystery, and mystery done right is a magnet. It pulls you in, and if you are a certain type of personality, you get drawn into a mystery, and the mystery becomes an obsession. Mm-hmm. And I'm obsessive. So I mean, I watched Lost Highway and I'm going, there's a whole bunch of different ways I can interpret this, or this makes me. I mean, I could probably sit and talk about Lost Highway and not talk about the plot or the characters at all, but just sort of tell stories, you know, like from my life or secondhand stories or whatever, that are things that Lost Highway makes me think of, you know, about memory and trauma and just different things. I mean, I think it's the kind of story that taps into, you know, the viewer's subconscious on that level, or those are conscious thoughts. I'm making conscious associations. And then by the end of the movie, if you're an obsessive type, you have to do something with that. I mean, I feel every time I saw a David Lynch movie for the first time, with a few exceptions, I then go away and I'm like, I have to write about that, or I have to go read about that. You know, I have to go find a book of David Lynch interviews and figure out, you know, what he has said. And I'm glad that he doesn't, you know, offer the answers. I mean, sometimes he comes close to saying, here's what I was thinking, and you can extrapolate from that. But that's the reason to go back and keep watching the movie. You know, you never.
I would agree with that. It resonates with you to the point that you get obsessive and you think, no, I've got to figure this out. I need something. And if you don't get it, you go back to the film. And then if you don't get it again, you get trapped in that cycle of, I need something. I need to figure this out. I need to get a little ounce of something to piece it together.
Right.
What do you guys think? What if Lynch purposely didn't have any sort of narrative in mind? What if he purposely has no
messing with our brain?
Yeah, exactly. What if he just simply, it's an experiment in what do you think? You know what I mean?
Like Darren Brown, and he's controlling the world.
That damn Darren Brown.
I mean, but this is the question: is like, what, you know, how do you define narrative? Because I don't think that he ever. Well, I don't know if I want to say ever. Most of the time, I don't think he has a linear narrative. You know, we think. I mean, it's more like it's like, you know, European, like Italian horror films of a certain vintage, you know, or even American horror films kind of in the 80s, like after Wes Craven made Nightmare on Elm Street. You've got this sort of rubber reality thing going on in a lot of horror movies. I mean, they're abstract, and the associations, they're kind of built on associations. We're going to come back to that phrase. We're going to come back to that image, but there's not going to be a clean story connection between the two things. And so it's dreamlike. You know, we're going to play on your subconscious. I mean, I think he does that probably better than anybody else. And yeah, I think you think he does it on purpose without actually having some sort of narrative in mind, particularly with this film, because I find there's far more narrative in something like Blue Velvet or, you know, whatever. But with this particular one, it almost to me, it just has that sort of thing about it where it just feels like he's kind of messing with the viewer. and being his first film for a while, you know, it just feels that way. Like it's, I mean, like I said, like an experiment in viewership. Like what do people think? What are they going to derive from this mess? Well, I think you're making distinctions maybe that he doesn't. I think his brain actually probably, right after years of transcendental meditation, his brain probably just works in a different way. You know, because I remember somebody, like there was a behind the scenes featurette for the new Twin Peaks. And I think the new season of Twin Peaks is as abstract as anything he's ever done, but I also think it's brilliant. And I remember somebody asking him about, there's some really dark, like the kid getting run over by the car. It's just, I mean, there's some really, really heavy, dark stuff in there. And I remember somebody asking about that, you know, like where does all this, you know, dark stuff come from? And does putting it on film help you to kind of exercise your demons and all, you know? And I remember them asking him this on camera, and he just kind of went, there's nothing dark in my stuff. You know, like, what are you talking about? Like, you know, I think it's part, I think in his brain, it's part of a whole. You know, I don't think like the way you framed that question of, do you think he's doing this on purpose to mess with us? I actually don't think he's doing it. I think this is just how David Lynch tells a story. You know, he's a non-linear thing. I mean, I had a little bit of this, actually. This is kind of funny that when I was working on the To Hell You Ride comic with Lance, Lance is kind of a non-linear thinker. He, you know, and so like when we got the offer to do that comic, And I sat down with Lance and I said, because he said he had written the whole story out as a screenplay in the 80s, but he didn't have a screenplay anymore. And so he was going off of memory, completely off of memory. And I'm like, all right. So I went over there, with my recorder, and we just sat down one day and I said, all right, tell me the story. And the opening was really, really vivid. It's still like the opening of that comic is very abstract, but he knew the beats. And then he kind of, the rest of the story, it was like he knew bits and pieces, and he was clearly, as he was telling, he was making connections that I couldn't follow. Okay. And it was like his way of telling a story is kind of, it's more impressionistic, maybe is a good word. But I remember when, I had to write out something and give it to our editor at Dark Horse Comics. And I remember having this phone conversation with him. It was just like a one-on-one, me and him without Lance. And he's like, can you rein this in to being a story, that we can follow. And I remember we had, what I jumped to was I said, well, all right, let's go this direction. Do you like David Lynch movies? And we had this long conversation about David Lynch movies and what works about them, and how there's this really delicate balance between giving people just enough material or just enough connections or just enough of a coherent narrative that they can sort of fill in the gaps for themselves and leave the story feeling kind of satisfied. Mm-hmm. And I said, I think we can get there. It's not ever going to be a one scene to the next point by point story. It's just not, that's not the story Lance wants to tell. And, there's no reason, I'm not going to try to turn it into something that it's not, because I really liked this sort of abstractness of it. Now, whether or not we succeeded, or whether or not I succeeded in reining that in, that's debatable. That's highly debatable. But I don't think that David Lynch always succeeds. So I remember having that conversation with the editor, and we talked about, Inland Empire. I mean, I think Inland Empire goes off the rails. Uh-huh. And I was not looking forward to the new season of Twin Peaks, because I thought, boy, the more canvas he's given, the more opportunity there is to go off the rails. But, I think the new season of Twin Peaks completely worked for me. There were only one or two little story lines that didn't work for me. And that was amazing, because it is a huge canvas. But I think if you know David Lynch's work, there was so much stuff in it that was providing callbacks to his earlier work and to earlier, the characters from the, 2 full seasons of Twin Peaks are there. These are actors that who've worked with David Lynch for years and years and years. So there's a mythology that it's kind of riffing on. And I think without that, it would be harder. I think it would still be brilliant, but I think it would be harder to come away from feeling satisfied, at least on.
Yeah, I think people have those sort of connections to the previous seasons and even the movie, maybe, to where if they tried to do something new, even if it's David Lynch, it still wouldn't have come over very well. I think people were hoping and expecting to have those connections, and it did work really well. And Inland Empire did go off the rails. So guys, we're hitting our hour mark here. I think we need to go through and we need to give this movie a rating, because that's what we do. And Joe, I don't know how much of our show you've listened to, but we do Gen bottles instead of stars for movies because we're alcoholics. And Carly loves Gen.
Don't tell people that. Yeah, we are functioning members of society who use this as a rating. What we are.
In 2020, everybody's an alcoholic.
Everybody's caught up with me in street, so it's fine.
It just took us to 2020 to do it. So Carly, since you've been the quietest one today, I want to hear your full on impression of this film and your rating, and I want to see where you stand with this. So you take us into this first, okay?
Okay. Well, I've been enjoying listening to you guys dissect it in a way that I could never do. I don't know if I'm going to surprise you with my rating. To be fair, I'm going to give you the rating first.
I don't think so.
I'm going to give you the rating first, and then
tell me your opinion first. I want to hear your opinion first, because then I think your rating's going to taint it for me.
Again, with the negativity, Chris. Why are you so negative of me?
Be careful. I want to put on some more dramatic piano.
Okay, go on then. Hit me, princess.
Do it however you want.
Okay, so I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10.
Oh, interesting. I did not expect that from you. You're right.
Do you think I'd be higher or lower?
Lower, much lower. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I felt bad giving it 7 out of 10.
You should.
Pure reason for giving it a 7 out of 10. You told me to drown myself in the toilet, okay? My pure rating for giving it a 7 out of 10 is I'm actually a very big fan of Jennifer Lynch as opposed to David Lynch. And
Interesting. Okay.
One of the films that I absolutely love is Surveillance, again, with Bill Pullman. And I would give that film a 9 out of 10. And I, probably because I understand it more.
About Surveillance.
I can follow it more. I understand it more. I can kind of, because this is a constant mystery to me. And to be fair, it probably deserves a 10 out of 10 for being a constant mystery in my brain. But it also infuriates me because there's so many ways that I can draw conclusions. And because I can't box one off, it continuously infuriates me. So it's kind of a bit of a love-hate with this film. I love that I can't figure it out, but I also hate that I can't figure it out.
Yeah.
That's an emotional reaction, I bet. That's good.
Yeah. Very emotional.
David Lynch would be happy, I think. I think David Lynch would be happy with that.
I hope so. We should email him and tell him and see what he says.
I think he'd be at his house going, "Goddamn Brits."
Bloody British woman. He'd be like, "Sorry, filthy Brit." It continues to bamboozles me, so I don't know. I don't know. This film messes with my brain. It messes with my rating and my gin consumption.
I find it surprising that Jennifer Lynch did a lot of television directing. Like she did some sort of inconsequential sort of TV, like Psych and Warehouse 13, stuff like that. I don't know. I always find that interesting. But all right, Carly, I expected it to be a much worse than that. So it's you made it respectful. I guess I can't say much about it. Yeah. And our guest today, Joe. I actually would just let Joe go last because he'll always have something good to say.
Oh, so you can be rubbish and then Joe will just cover you. Okay, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing, Morris.
This is my favorite David Lynch movie. I love this movie. I don't know why though, and I can't express it articulately other than I love the style. I love the feel of this movie. I think it's full of shitty people, which isn't normally my thing. But there's just some unspoken thing to me in my brain that I connect to with this movie. And I don't know if it's the time period that it came out. I don't know if it just, it had part of that marketing sense. Cause like 9 Inch Nails was huge at the time. Marilyn Manson was huge at the time, bringing that stuff together for the soundtrack. I was huge into soundtracks at the time, or just the darkness of it, the noir feeling of it. I didn't know much about noir at the time, not till several years later. So, and it's got one of my favorite film opening credit sequence of just going down this highway with these titles just shooting towards the screen. It's just, I loved it. The entire soundtrack I think is amazing. Even like the excellent choices with the Bowie stuff and just everything in it is just great. But I can't really tell you what the fuck it's about. I can't tell you what he was trying to say with it. Other than just like my own personal feelings. And I got a feeling that that's whether it was intentional or not, that's just sort of the way it's supposed to be. And I guess some movies just are. And I understand it's like probably too abstract for most people. but I think this is Lynch at his best. I think this is Bill Pullman at his best. And the rest of the cast is just so just great ensemble. Even if they're only in like a scene or something, it's just interesting just to see somebody like pop up like Richard Pryor or whoever it might be. It was just great choices all around. But just a goddamn weird movie. You know, it's just so weird. I just don't know how else to. If somebody asked me to try to, if somebody said like, "Yo, should I watch Lost Highway?" I would say absolutely yes. But if they asked me what it's about, I don't fucking know. You just got to watch it for yourself.
I'd be careful about who you recommend it to. This is not a movie for everybody.
It is not. But I mean, I'm that way though, because I feel like if, you know, and I know this is a shitty like perspective, but I feel like if I like something, I want other people to like it, even if they don't, you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't try to force that on them, but I do. Let's be honest. It's like Carly and Bogart, you know, she'll try to make you love Bogart.
I will. Manipulation, bribery, any way, shape or form. Worst of all, I'll make you a smoothie. You're going to fucking watch the films then.
Oh yeah, she's on a smoothie kick now, so she's trying to force those on people. You need to create a Bogart smoothie, and maybe people will drink it.
Oh my god, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm undecided as whether I'd give this a 9 or a 10. I want to give it a 10, but then I see like certain aspects to it of it being sort of I wouldn't necessarily say a flawed narrative, but like one that general public can't grasp onto or even attempt to understand or want to. So commercial wise, I guess there's that sort of part of me that bleeds in, I guess, from being a filmmaker, saying that this is way too weird for most people. So how could it possibly be a 10? But to me personally, I would give this 10 gens out of 10. So there you have it.
Nice.
Joe, I'm interested because I have this feeling that Joe's going to be a 10, but maybe he might surprise me and like be a 2 or something.
Just for like a twist ending, like the Twilight Zone ending where I pull the rug out.
Yeah, you're just like, I love this movie, but I fucking hate it. It gets a 0.
Two caveats. Number one, I hate gin.
So do I.
Gin is the only type of alcohol that's ever made me really sick. So, so I'm not a fan of gin. I also have to say that probably the thing that like the Rammstein cues. I'm not a fan of Rammstein. I could have done without that, but really, other than that, I mean, those are my caveats. Like to me, I don't really have any misgivings about this film at all. It's a 10 for me.
Nice. I'm actually surprised to hear about the Rammstein because I thought that stuff fit perfectly.
Yeah, I think it's just the vocal part of it that I'm like, no, it feels like over the top. That's like the one moment where it kind of pulls me out of the mood of the thing. But actually, here's an interesting story. So I did, I did the documentary on the making of the mixtape.
Yes.
The Analog Love, and we interviewed Henry Rollins, and he told this story about the one day he was on Lost Highway, because he's really just there as like the prison guard, and he has one line or 2 lines or whatever it is, and all he's really doing is escorting Bill Pullman down those stairs. And so there's not a whole lot of, acting involved in what he, it's not any heavy lifting, but the story that he told was that on the set, David Lynch for that scene was playing something that he thought was Rammstein or was something like Rammstein, and that he had these giant speakers, and David Lynch just, turned it up to 11 for them walking down just as like this, and he said, I had to go and ask him, later, like, why did you do that? And he said, David Lynch told me that I wanted a physical reaction. And he said, I then went and watched the footage of me walking down these stairs. And he said, I'm really hunched up. I'm really tense. That's not how I walk. He made me walk in a tense way. And as a viewer, you watch that and it's like this little subtle thing that you pick up in the performance of like, something's going to happen because this guy's tensed up. He looks like he's, like he's ready to defend himself, or he's ready to attack or whatever. And the music being that loud was getting that physical reaction. So it's another instance of David Lynch using music, just using everything at his disposal.
Right. That's amazing, actually, for it to have that kind of effect on Henry Rollins, of all people. I figured he would be used to
that loud.
Right. That's true.
Yeah.
I guess it depends on being there and actually experiencing it.
Well, but also, and also just, I don't think he was given any warning. So it's like, okay, action. And then
it'd be like a shock to the system kind of thing.
Yeah. Like you still have to be in, you don't want to, break character. So you kind of react instinctively, but you're probably also going, what the fuck is he doing? Like what am I supposed to react to that? So you just tense up because you don't know so it's the same thing. He's doing the same thing to an actor in that instance that he's doing to the viewer, where you're watching it. You're like, what's going on? Something bad's going to happen. Why is this happening? It's the same thing. I mean, he's messing with you.
Well, Joe, thank you for coming on the show and discussing this movie. I couldn't think of anyone else that would have been better suited for this. I think your analysis and analytical mind, I think, is perfect for this sort of thing. Right up your alley.
It's fun.
Before we get out of here, is there any upcoming projects you're working on that you want to plug for people to check out, or somewhere people can find you if they want to read your stuff?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of books floating around. The newest one is a book on Brainstorm, the Christopher Walken movie from 1983. I did a whole study of that, where I went and found all the different drafts of the script that were written over like the 10-year development period. And that's a fascinating movie to me. There's I sort of came away from that experience going, there's about 8 good movies in Brainstorm, and the finished film is maybe not such a good movie because it just is trying to do too much, and there's too many fragments of too many good movies that just couldn't all be crammed into this one movie. So
I still love it.
Yeah, it's I love a lot of things about it. I love it more realizing everything that went into it. So I hope that for people who love the movie, that the book actually makes them love it more. And for people who don't love the movie, maybe they go, oh wow, there actually are some pretty brilliant things going on here.
Well, that's for me, it's going to be a must-have to pick that up. Like, I couldn't imagine, like, how could you even find the material to write that? Like, where did these scripts come from? I figured they would be lost to time.
Well, I'm really good friends with Bruce Rubin, who was the one who originated that idea. I mean, he wrote the original script for that in 1973 under a completely different title, and didn't, like, he was going to produce it independently for a while, and then that fell through, and then it got bought by a Hollywood producer and sort of redeveloped. And then, a new writer came on and turned it into a completely different type of movie. And then another writer came on, turned it in. Then Doug Trumbull came on as a director, and he wanted to emphasize different parts of the story than what were emphasized in the multiple drafts by 2 writers. And so then he brought in a new writer, but sort of only took some of the things that the new writer brought. I mean, it just went through this crazy Hollywood development process and this, a lot of movies go through this, and they just, a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So Bruce had basically had a closet in his house where he'd kept every, draft of every movie he ever wrote.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, have at it. So I went through all his drafts of what was called the George Dunlap tape, which was his original Brainstorm story. And then I reached out to the other writers who were credited on the film and got their drafts. And then went to the Academy Library in Beverly Hills, and they had some more drafts, interviewed all the writers, interviewed Doug Trumbull, who had also sort of done a draft at one point. And when there was a completely lost draft that somebody, Robert Getchell, came in and wrote a draft, because he was really hot. He had just done, was it Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, I think. Is that right? I can't remember now, but he was really hot as a screenwriter, as doing sort of dramatic films. And so he was hired to come in and do a page 1 rewrite that got eventually scrapped. But I found that draft in special collections at Harvard University and read that one.
Wow.
And so, I mean, I really just went through, step by step by step by step. And even though like the Getchell draft got completely discarded, there's still little bits in the finished film where you're kind of like, yeah, that's that. I think that it's not a quote from Getchell's draft, but you can see how he influenced the project. So the whole book I wrote was about this kind of creative evolution of an idea, all the mutations that it had to go through to end up on the screen. And when you know all of those mutations, you watch the film, and like I said, you can see kind of 8 different films in one. You can see all these little bits and bobs of ideas that had they been pursued on their own independently would have been, like this would, version 1 would have been a really interesting movie, and version 2 would have been a really interesting movie, and but they're almost different genres.
Wow.
So there's all this, it's a huge, Brainstorm's a good title for that movie because it kind of,
it was a brainstorm of scripts.
It's sort of a brain buster, So that's my long-winded pitch for that, and that's I think that's available end of September.
And what's the actual title of the book? Is it just Brainstorm, or?
It's just Brainstorm. Yeah, it's part of a series called Constellations.
Okay.
Which is actually being published in the States by Oxford University Press, and in the UK by Liverpool University Press.
Okay.
So that's floating around, and then the next one will be the Stephen King, adapting Stephen King. So that'll be a whole. But don't get me started on that, because good God, we'll be talking for another hour.
Right. That's right. People know that it's coming, so hopefully we'll keep an eye on it. And I would suggest everybody pick up a copy of Brainstorm. I'm going to, and hopefully it does hit shelves at the end of September, because I want to read it before I rewatch Brainstorm, because it's been a while. I suggest you guys do the same thing. Joe, thank you again for coming on today. It's been amazing to talk to you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, guys. We hope that you enjoy your rusty nail and enjoy watching or listening to us talk about Lost Highways. Now go watch the film again and be even more confused than we are. All right. And we'll see you again next week.
Cool.
Until then.
Bye-bye.
He's looking at you, kid.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Speakeasy Noircast. Make sure to visit our website, resurrectionfilms.net, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or any of your favorite podcast apps so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like the show, you might want to check out our book, The Dark Side of Acting Up and The Dark Side of Acting Up Volume 2, now available on Amazon. Or you can check out one of our films, also available on Amazon Prime. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the Speakeasy Noircast.